The courtroom buzzed with an energy that crackled in the air, a tension so thick you could almost cut it with a knife. The case at hand was high profile, a political scandal that had captured the attention of both the media and the public. Pam Bondi, former Florida Attorney General, sat at the defendant's table, her face a mask of professionalism. But behind those calm eyes, a storm was brewing. Judge Thomas Marlowe, known for his sharp tongue and wit, was presiding over the case. Bondi had been called in to answer questions about her involvement in the scandal, a case that had the potential to destroy careers. But there was something more at play today, something that no one could quite predict. Ms. Bondi, Judge Marlowe said, his voice dripping with sarcasm, I must say, I'm absolutely stunned. For someone who claims to have the moral high ground, your record in office doesn't quite align with that picture, does it? A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Bondi, ever composed, held his gaze without flinching. She had been through far worse than this. But there was something about Marlowe's tone that suggested today wouldn't be like the others. He continued, Tell me, Ms. Bondi, how do you sleep at night, knowing your office was involved in, well, let's call it what it is, shady dealings. The room fell silent, all eyes trained on Bondi as the tension mounted. This was no ordinary courtroom exchange. The stakes were high, and so was the drama. The next words out of Bondi's mouth would either sink or save her. But instead of flinching, she smiled slightly, preparing her response. For a moment, the room held its breath. The audience was hanging on to every second, wondering how Bondi would respond. Would she snap back in anger? Would she cower under the judge's sharp questioning? But instead, Pam Bondi leaned forward slightly, her hands poised on the table as if she was about to speak softly, almost conspiratorially. The judge raised an eyebrow, expecting some sort of nervous defensive response. Your Honor, she began, her voice smooth, I sleep quite well, actually. Unlike some people who have to lie awake at night, wondering how much of their own scandalous behavior will come back to haunt them. There was a collective gasp from the courtroom. Even the stenographer's fingers paused on the keyboard. Judge Marlowe's eyes widened, the sharp sarcasm he had employed now staring back at him. For a split second, the judge seemed to be caught off guard, his usually steady composure faltering. Bondi continued, her voice now confident, almost playful, and I'll be the first to admit, every politician has their skeletons. But I've never hidden mine behind a facade of virtue, unlike some people. She gave a slight, calculated pause, letting the words hang in the air before finishing with a smile that could have frozen the room over. The room fell into stunned silence. Even the most hardened members of the press could not hide their surprise. No one had expected that from Bondi. The courtroom had just witnessed a political comeback wrapped in sharp wit. The judge, still processing, cleared his throat. But his expression said it all. Pam Bondi had not only held her ground, she had flipped the script entirely. It was clear that this trial was far from over, but one thing was certain now, Pam Bondi was a force to be reckoned with. The tension in the courtroom remained palpable as Judge Marlowe took a moment to regain his composure. His face flushed a shade darker, but his lips twitched, betraying a hint of admiration for Bondi's wit. It wasn't often that anyone, let alone a defendant, managed to disarm him in such a way. For a brief moment, the judge's sharp, unyielding presence softened. But Marlowe wasn't one to back down easily. He leaned forward, eyes narrowing, his fingers tapping rhythmically on the desk in front of him. Ms. Bondi, he began, his voice far more measured, that was a clever response. But let's not pretend that your words will make these accusations disappear. He was clearly trying to regain control of the situation, but Bondi's calm smile never wavered. It was as if she had anticipated this moment, knew exactly how to navigate it. There was something undeniably magnetic about her confidence in this moment, a reminder of the political battles she had survived in her career. Well, Your Honor, Bondi said, her tone cool and controlled, I'm not here to make accusations disappear. I'm here to defend myself against a smear campaign, just like any person would. She straightened up, eyes meeting the judge's with a steadiness that seemed to challenge him. And if the facts and the law are on my side, there's no amount of ridicule or intimidation that will change that. The room seemed to collectively inhale. This wasn't just a trial anymore, it had turned into a fierce exchange, a battle of wills. The audience, the press, and even the jurors couldn't tear their eyes away from the escalating drama. Judge Marlowe looked down at his papers, flipping through them with a practiced air, though his expression betrayed the internal struggle. The case was more complex than he had initially thought, and Pam Bondi's quick wit and calm demeanor had thrown him off balance in a way he hadn't expected. He took a deep breath and adjusted his glasses before responding, "Perhaps, Ms. Bondi. But let's see if the facts support your words or if they're merely a convenient shield." The courtroom waited, the tension thick as it ever had been. Bondi knew this was far from over. But she had already won the first round, and she wasn't about to let that slip through her fingers. The stage was set for what would undoubtedly be one of the most riveting trials of the decade. The courtroom seemed to hold its breath, as if time itself had slowed down. Judge Marlowe had given her a challenge, and Pam Bondi was ready to take it head-on. She knew that this was not just a legal battle, but a psychological one that tested her poise and resilience. Bondi's attorney stood up to present their next piece of evidence, a document that would supposedly discredit the accusations that had been levied against her. But before the document could be fully introduced, Marlowe interrupted, his voice laced with sarcasm. "Another piece of paper, Ms. Bondi? More paperwork to save your career?" His smirk was evident. "Let's see if we can get through this without more clever remarks." But Bondi wasn't rattled. Instead, she leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms with an air of calm that made her seem untouchable. "Your Honor, I believe you've just missed the point," she said, her voice carrying across the room. "The paperwork isn't about saving my career, it's about proving the truth. But I guess that's a concept that's harder to grasp when you're focused on mockery." The room went quiet again. The audacity of her statement hit like a thunderclap, and everyone, press, lawyers, jurors, felt the power of her words. It was like watching a high-stakes chess match unfold, every move calculated, every word loaded with meaning. Judge Marlowe's face tightened. He had underestimated Pam Bondi. But what was worse, he knew it. And now he had to decide whether to keep going with his mocking tone or allow the facts to speak for themselves. He exhaled sharply, trying to regain his authority. "Let's see these so-called facts then," he said, waving his hand dismissively toward the table where the evidence lay. "Bring it forward. Let the truth speak for itself." Bondi's attorney stepped forward, holding up the document as the courtroom collectively leaned in. The evidence she presented wasn't just about paperwork, it was about showing how a political opponent had manipulated the system, how certain high-profile figures had twisted the law for personal gain. It painted a picture of corruption that was hard to ignore. As Bondi's lawyer read aloud, the weight of the evidence settled in. The room felt heavy with realization, this case wasn't as cut and dry as anyone had thought. Judge Marlowe's initial mockery of Bondi's character now seemed to be backfiring, the very words he had used to taunt her being exposed as ill-founded. Bondi's eyes met the judge's once more, her expression calm, but the fire in her gaze unmistakable. "You wanted to see the truth, Your Honor," she said softly, but with undeniable strength. "Well, here it is." The room held its breath, waiting for Marlowe's response. The judge, who had prided himself on maintaining control of the courtroom, now seemed visibly flustered. His fingers tapped erratically against the bench as he skimmed through the evidence in front of him. His sharp gaze flicked between the document and Bondi, then back to the document again, as if trying to grasp the gravity of the situation. His earlier smirk had long faded, replaced by a look of growing discomfort. The room was dead silent. It wasn't just the jury who was uneasy, even the press seemed to hesitate, unsure of what to write, as if the narrative they had been prepared to tell was suddenly slipping through their fingers. Pam Bondi, sitting with a quiet yet palpable confidence, was watching the judge carefully. She knew she had the upper hand, and though she didn't show it, the weight of the moment felt like it was tipping in her favor. Her calculated response, the wit that had disarmed Marlowe, had now set the stage for this shift in the case. After what felt like an eternity, Judge Marlowe set the document down and straightened his glasses, clearing his throat. He paused, collecting his thoughts. This is not what I was expecting. His voice had lost some of its earlier biting edge, now tinged with a reluctant respect. Bondi didn't let his momentary hesitation pass without comment. Your Honor, you asked for facts, she said, her voice steady but carrying a touch of pointed emphasis. You wanted the truth, and now we have it. The real question is whether you can face it. The judge opened his mouth to respond but hesitated. The courtroom had gone from a place of mockery to one of real stakes. Marlowe's challenge had inadvertently forced him to confront the facts of the case, facts that were quickly becoming undeniable. His earlier remarks, which had been intended to undermine Bondi, now seemed like empty bluster. Bondi's attorney seized the moment. Your Honor, as you can see, the facts in front of you are not just about Pam Bondi, they're about a system that has been manipulated by those in power. If we allow this kind of corruption to go unchecked, no one will be safe. Not the public, not anyone. That's why we're here today. The judge, now visibly aware of the shift in the courtroom dynamics, leaned back, his fingers drumming against his chin. His face was a mask of contemplation. No one could say how this would play out, but one thing was clear, Bondi was far from defeated. And now, for the first time, Judge Marlowe had to question his own stance. The balance of power had shifted, and the courtroom was waiting for what came next. The tension in the room had reached a boiling point. Even the slightest movement seemed to echo through the courtroom. Judge Marlowe, who had once ruled this space with an iron fist, now seemed hesitant, almost uncertain of his position. He stared at the evidence in front of him, his mind no longer focused on tearing down Pam Bondi, but on the weight of the facts she had presented. His demeanor had changed, what was once arrogance had been replaced with an uncomfortable awareness. Pam Bondi, on the other hand, was calm, collected, but the fire in her eyes told a different story. She knew the stakes had shifted in her favor, and now it was time to deliver the final blow. Her attorney, sensing the moment, moved to make one last point. Your Honor, this evidence is irrefutable. The facts speak for themselves. The manipulations, the conflicts of interest, these are not matters of opinion, they are matters of law. Judge Marlowe's fingers stilled on the bench. His gaze lingered on Bondi as if he was trying to assess whether she had truly won him over, or if she was simply playing the game with the skill of a seasoned political figure. His mind raced, torn between his previous contempt for her and the undeniable truth that was being laid bare in front of him. And then, without warning, Pam Bondi stood up. Her presence filled the room, and all eyes were on her. With deliberate precision, she addressed the judge once again. Your Honor, she said, her voice smooth but cutting, you've asked me how I sleep at night, whether I can live with the decisions I've made. But the real question is, how do you live with yourself knowing that you have the power to uphold the law, to fight against the very corruption that this court has been complicit in, and yet you've chosen to mock the truth? Her words hung in the air, sharp and unyielding. The room was still, the audience captivated by the force behind her words. Even the stenographer paused, as if unsure how to capture the weight of the statement. Bondi took a step forward, her gaze fixed firmly on the judge. I have no illusions about this trial. I'm not here to win you over, or to save face. I'm here because I believe in justice. And today, the truth is going to prevail. Not just for me, but for everyone who's been manipulated by this system. You may have tried to play games with me, but you're not the one who gets to decide what's right. The judge opened his mouth, as if preparing to respond, but the words caught in his throat. He could see now that this wasn't just about a political figure on trial, it was about the very integrity of the system itself. Pam Bondi had just turned the courtroom into a stage for something far bigger than her personal case. Finally, after a long pause, Judge Marlowe sighed deeply. He looked over the evidence one last time, his fingers pressing against the table. "Enough," he said quietly. "The facts will speak. We'll proceed accordingly." It wasn't a declaration of victory, but it was a recognition that the tides had turned. Bondi had done what many thought impossible. She had not only survived the ridicule, but had forced her opponent into a corner, one from which there was no easy escape. As the gavel came down, the courtroom erupted into a murmur. The case was far from over, but for Pam Bondi, today had been a victory in a battle much larger than she had ever imagined. As the gavel struck with a final thud, signaling the end of the day's proceedings, a heavy silence filled the courtroom. Judge Marlowe's reluctant acquiescence had shifted the momentum in Pam Bondi's favor, but the outcome of the trial was still uncertain. Yet, something in the air had changed. The atmosphere was charged with a sense of finality, a sense that Bondi had won the day, regardless of how the case played out in the end. Bondi stood tall as she gathered her papers, her face a mask of determination, yet the faintest trace of a smile tugged at the corner of her lips. It was a small victory for her, a victory not just over the case, but over the judge who had tried to break her down. Her attorney placed a hand on her shoulder as they walked toward the exit, and Bondi nodded slightly in acknowledgement. There was no need for words. She had faced the ridicule, the mockery, and she had turned it into something far more powerful. Today, she had proven that strength wasn't just about who had the loudest voice or the sharpest tongue, it was about how well you could stand firm when the world tried to tear you apart. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed, desperate to get a statement. Bondi, ever composed, turned to face them. "What happened today was bigger than me," she began, her voice clear and strong. This was about showing that the truth can't be buried under mockery or political games. We all have a responsibility to uphold justice, no matter the personal cost. And as for me, I'll sleep just fine tonight, knowing I didn't let this system defeat me. The press buzzed with excitement, the story now taking on a life of its own. The media would have their headlines, but the real story, the one that would linger in the minds of everyone in that courtroom, was the quiet power of Pam Bondi's words. She had shown the world that resilience wasn't just about surviving, it was about fighting back, strategically, intelligently, and with unshakable confidence. As the reporters dispersed, some still trying to get a final word, Bondi and her attorney walked away from the courthouse, disappearing into the crowds. They knew that this was only the beginning of a long and complicated fight, but Pam Bondi had proven that she wasn't going down without a fight. The judge had ridiculed her, but it was clear, she had come out on top. And so, the courtroom drama, in the end, wasn't just about legal tactics. It was about the power of character and conviction in the face of adversity. Bondi had demonstrated that no matter how much mockery or scorn you faced, the truth could never be silenced.